Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Pennsylvania Florida Eastern for Train Talks number 3. Today we're going to be talking about a couple things. The main topic is going to be about brass and brass hybrid engines, and really we're going to get into the brass hybrid engines that have been made by Broadway Limited, and we're also going to be talking about the brass models that are out there and maybe brass hybrid recommendations for Broadway to do. And we're also going to talk about what Broadway Limited Imports has already done as for brass models for the Pennsylvania Railroad. We're also going to talk about the brass engines that I also have. I currently have 2 Pennsylvania brass engines, and I have 2 brass hybrid Pennsylvania engines by Broadway Limited. To get into the brass hybrid engines, Broadway Limited Imports, for those who do not know who Broadway Limited Imports is, they make die-cast chassis plastic body models, as well as die-cast hybrid models that have die-cast bodies and frames with plastic details and also brass details. And they're pretty well known for their brass hybrid series. Basically, they make low quantity, but not too low quantity amounts of basically brass engines with die-cast chassis, and they sell them for a much reasonable price than the brass models that are out there. However, some brass models out there are even lower priced than the brass hybrid models. For example, we have 2 Q2s here. Sorry about the camera falling over. It's kind of lopsided. I'm not sure why, but it is what it is, right? Cancel that. There we go. Sorry about that. So I have 2 Broadway Limited Q2s. Got in camera right there. Very, very well detailed models. I mean, they are very well detailed. Now there is a Q2 that's out there made by, actually there's 2. There's Westside and there's, I believe, Gem also has made these as well. I'm not exactly sure if anybody else has made a cheaper brass Q2 out there. This model, when it came out, was like around $500 to $600. Somewhere around in that range, maybe at most $700, I guess. But they were actually, considering the fact, pretty cheap when it came out about 10 years ago. The Q2s. Right now, they go around between $800, $900. Sometimes somebody's not going to really sell it for that value and go for cheaper and sell it for a lot cheaper if you can get to it in time. There are 2 runs of the brass hybrid Q2s. Each run had around 800 made. Who knows how many are left now from destruction or damage or anything like that. But I have 2 of the 1,600 in total made. And for those who do not know the story about the Q2s by Broadway Limited, they can't make these anymore. They do not have the rights to, and they don't have the rights to the tooling anymore. That's what I wanted to say. They don't have the rights to the tooling anymore, so they can't really make these anymore. And for them to make a brand new tooling, even if, one of us donated our models to Broadway Limited for them to, remake the tooling, it would still cost a lot of money to remake the tooling, which is unfortunate because I see a lot of people on the Facebook Broadway Limited collectors group on Facebook, and they a lot of people want a Q2, and to them, you got to be patient, or you got to put up the money for it, or you can find alternatives like brass models. As you see the 2 models on the right, one of them you might see to be something familiar. This Q1 over here. This is a brass Q1 made by NJCB. Only 200 have been made with the streamlining shrouding on this engine. This engine you've probably seen on Trainman 440's channel if you are a viewer from Trainman 440's channel, which, by the way, is a very great channel. I highly recommend you check out his channel. I was the guy who basically bought it from him, even though I technically bought it. He just bought it for me at the show that he was at, that he got this engine from. And I told him I would buy it and I would pay monthly for it. And I'm almost done paying him off for it. And he did a job on it where he put TCS WOW into it. And I have to say, he did a really good job with the electrical stuff. I'm impressed. I tried to run it on my 35.5 inch radius curves, and it actually can take it. I believe the minimum is around 30-inch radius. I strongly believe this engine can handle this curve radius with no problem. The problem is that the front driver wheels were skipping. And I tried to fix it on my own, which is kind of stupid because I don't have a super amount of experience, so I'm not really a veteran with brass models. But you know what? Sometimes you got to try things, and you can't be afraid to try something that can be very difficult. And unfortunately, well, most likely what happened is that, I kind of made the situation worse, and it started shorting out, and yeah, it's not going to run. So this is the first time you'll see this engine on my channel. Eventually, I talked with Trayman 440 to hopefully come up with an idea to try and fix this model. He says he can't get it to ready to roll status, which is understandable. This is a brass engine. This is completely made out of metal that can, that's conductivity. Not only that, there's also limitations in on the model's articulation. Similar to the Q2, the Q2 seems to have a minimum radius, from what I understand from their website, of 22-inch radius. Realistically, I think it's 24-inch radius curves. I have operated both Q2s at my club and from Broadway, and they performed really well. The only issue is sometimes the tender, it's really the tenders that sometimes have an issue. I have tested over a Japanese-made X crossing. It's a crossing that also has two parallel tracks at the end of each crossing. It's a double crossover. And sometimes the Q2 does not like it depending on the direction of travel. Sometimes in reverse, it just doesn't like it. And you have to go slowly. You can't really go fast with flying with the Q2 over it. It's a number 6 turnout, though. It has a number 6 turnout, which is usually a higher end, curve radius. So it could be the Q2 in general, or it could be not really the Q2. Maybe it needs the springs to be stiffer. I don't know. Other than that, it's rather a fluke that it happens. Again, this is you're working with big engines on curves. I mean, these were mainline engines, and for them to go over, a crossover, it's kind of squirrely in itself. Although, if we look on the bottom of the Q2, which I'll do, we got 6187 here, which is actually the engine that pretty much is close to being certified for the club. It has, only one blind driver. Right, where is it? No, I'm going the wrong way. Right here. That's a blind driver right there. It's the first driver of the rear set of wheels. Similar to the Q1, it's the same story. The center drive wheel is blind. However, it is sprung. The rear drivers are rather stiff and they do not have a lot of play. All these wheels are sprung. All driver wheels. Not the tender, not the tender. The trailing pilot, the trailing truck does not have sprung wheels, which is fine. I don't care. But the pilot for this is sprung, but it's not a ridiculous amount. It doesn't tilt as much, which is fine, and that's also good. Sorry if it's not centered. I'm trying to look at the model and look at the screen at the same time. But both the front two drivers of the first set, or set of drivers, those drivers are all have flanges, even the last two on the second set. So this engine already has, has to do a lot in terms of turning. And they do have play so that they can go around corners. So does the rear and the middle one as well. So They can't get around tight corners. Surprising enough for a brass hybrid of this caliber, which is why I really like Broadway's brass hybrid stuff. They can do huge engines that with a lot of detail, and it can go around curves that you wouldn't think would they go around. And we compare it to the Q1, which, by the way, the Q2 and the Q1 are relatively the same size. I mean, the wheel distances, I would say the wheel distance, even though the Q2 has smaller driver wheels, the amount of coverage that these wheels have is basically the same. To be honest with you, this footprint right here is, I think, the same or a little bit less than the Q2 from Broadway Limited. Granted, the problem is that they do have actually play. They have a good amount of wiggle room. These drivers do have a really good amount of wiggle room. Even the center, the front, and the very front. And actually, the actual gearboxes are in the same positions on the same driver wheels. And granted, this is a 4.644. It's pretty much the opposite of the Q2, but it's basically the same idea. It's the same flanged and the same center wheel non-flanged problem. So the real question is what's the real issue? Well, one of the main problems is that this rear truck right here on the Q1 has these things right here, and these are probably where they let steam out and let it leak out so that it doesn't rust the cylinders, obviously. But it has a limited amount of motion, which is a problem. Also, some of this piping, as you can see, is getting scratched up from probably this pilot bumping up against it, is also another issue. Now, there could be modifications for this, and you can only do so much with a brass model to make it run. The front pilot is a little bit annoying with the shaking around and stuff, which it probably needs maybe better. I would say it should get a couple, maybe one or two, and a smaller spring to fit inside, so it doesn't have an issue of going through, the holes of the pilot's guide for the pin to be in place. So, and it tilts side to side too much. It's not good. The drivers, in my opinion, are fine. The brake shoes, though, I think they need to go. And I think, again, that's what's causing the shorting issues that I probably caused when I tried to fix the springing issue of this engine. Now, the NJCB model, talking about this, has a kind of leaf spring-like suspension. So there's basically two wires in there that go around the bearing, almost like a U formation, and you want to keep that spring. You can adjust it too. You can adjust the suspension. However, it's a little tedious, and unfortunately, at the end of the springs, they start to make this V shape. They start to go pinch in on both ends, and what happens is that the springs miss the wire misses the bearing at at each end of the axle of the drivers. So what I mean by that is the axle in the front and the final axle of the driving, the driving wheels. They miss those bearings that they're supposed to rest on or pretty much be up against. They actually hit the axle, which makes the spring actually softer, even if it's a couple, millimeters. It makes a big difference, and I guess that's what causes some of the derailing. Now, interesting enough, this derailing phenomenon happens halfway around my corner. It doesn't. The curvature is the same throughout, so there's no it's too tight for the locomotive. No, it can handle it. It does. I have seen it ran. I've seen it run entirely through, and it can do it. Funny enough, it doesn't derail going backwards. That's strange, isn't it? So it has to be something to do with the pilot or spring system. Either way, it needs work. It needs work so it can be able to handle my layout with barely any issues at all, shorting issues whatsoever. And to be honest, I don't mind to trim some of the brass on this model. Now, some people are like, well, you'll devalue the model. I don't care. This is my engine. I want it to run and I want it to be functional. To me, true worth is through the functionality of the locomotive or whatever it is. Because if something's really expensive, which this engine really is expensive, if you've seen, I can tell you the value of it right now, and it's definitely over 4 figures. Not that far, not that high over 4 figures, but just over 4 figures. So you're looking at something that's over $1,000. Granted, only 200 of these streamlined variants have been made. There have been 400 versions of the modified unstreamlined version by NJCB. So there's only 200 of these in existence. Some people are like, well, you're going to ruin it, and it's going to ruin the value. To be honest, I don't care. This is a really good paint value for what it is. Okay, and if you've seen it on Trainman 440, he has better lighting than me. Right now, I can't really do lighting upgrades and stuff. The best lighting is pretty much at my train club, which, I don't really want to sit on a layout and cause like a huge short and everything and fry everybody's decoders and the club's locomotive decoders as well. So until then, this locomotive is pretty much a shelf queen. Unfortunately, that's the last thing I want this engine to be, is to be a shelf queen. For right now, it will have to be a shelf queen, unfortunately, until I have somebody to work out the kinks and get it as close as possible to a ready-to-run status like that Q2. Maybe close to that Q2. Because that Q2, it is a brass model. It can cause shorts. However, it's been engineered to basically not cause shorts for most layouts. Unless you made a shitty layout, and well, there you go. Now, can my layout be shit? Possibly. I don't know. It's just a simple oval. I can't imagine how much of a F up I could possibly do to make someone be able to just short, on a simple oval, right? Who knows? But that's the difference between, simple brass models. Now, you might be wondering, that last brass locomotive, which is the other brass locomotive I have, that's not brass hybrid, that is a N1SA. That is made by Sam Hongza, imported by Gem Models. That model is actually a funny runner. It's surprising that I haven't talked about it, huh? I don't think anybody knows about this model other than my good buddy, Trainman 440. This engine hasn't been showcased on the channel. It has been test run, and it does run, but it does a little bit of smoking. It's an old motor in there, and it needs to be thrown out in with a new CAN motor in there. Currently, I'm not in the whole mix and match stuff yet. I'm still working with the electronics on plastic models or ready to roll kind of models. I really want to master that craft first of working with plastic models or die cast hybrid models first before I really start to just throw myself into like working with purely brass models that everything can short. Everything can possibly go wrong. But it ran without causing shorts. Even as a DC motive power, it can run, and it will run. However, it just makes a lot of sparks, and you could see it when it runs under that firebox of it. By the way, I'll bring it up closer. It does light up, which is cool. Unfortunately, it broke the front step, which is usually supposed to be made out of wood, but that could also be fixed. Unfortunately, this locomotive, I believe, is black. It probably is black. Although it does look slightly green, but that's probably because of the lighting. However, it does blend well with everything else. And the paint job's not awful. And the number is there. It's 9,860. It's a 210-2 type. This is a Pennsylvania-like model. And I don't know, it looks like it got fixed after I tried to warp this brass deck plate here to go back in the neutral position. It's got a really interesting headlight. It's got like a streamlined look to it, which is strange. This is a workhorse engine. It's got a huge stand dome, which only has 3 pipes going on each side, which is strange. This is a 210 too, so I don't know. The detail is pretty fine. It doesn't. If I always wanted to add more, I can, but it doesn't really need it. There's that weird motor in there. It's an open frame motor, if I can recall, and it's a 3-pole, I think. Yeah, it makes smoke. My buddy Trayman's like, oh, that's normal, you know, they make smoke. They're pretty fun. I'm like, yeah, I think that's going to set my house on fire. It's got backhead detail, which is pretty funny, actually. The whole, you could set the house on fire. So you could put crew figures in there at some point. Who knows if I'll put, painted detail in there. Which, by the way, if you see backhead detail on your brass engine, that means it's a late 70s and early 80s and so on model. So that's when they really started to add more detail to these models. Eventually, I'd like to have the smoke box graphite. Sorry, that's not in view. The smoke box right here, I'd like to have graphite, and the bottom of the firebox under the side walkway to be graphite as well. And then the roof will be painted dark Tuscan, and then the tender top would be Tuscan. There's no coal load on this, by the way. But judging the look of the tender, if you look at it, you can barely see that that's the roof of the tender. There's not a lot of space you could put coal in there to actually have depth to your coal load, which is okay. I don't really care. But that tells me that there could be a lot of space to be put in this engine, especially when it comes to electronics. And this is a big engine. This is a huge engine. This is bigger than a decapod. This engine was specifically designed to be a 210 too. This is not no alteration. No, this is a big engine. And it handles my layout fine. And I forgot, it also has, just like the Q1, well, just like the Qs, they have a center driver, blind driver. I don't know what the minimum radius on this engine is. I can only tell. It's got a nice little ladder here, by the way. That's pretty cool. It's a nice model. The decals are okay. I can barely tell. Well, you can tell, but not in the video. But the decals on here, you can barely tell that they were decals. There's no like rectangle line around the light, which is pretty cool. It's pretty cool that the guy did a pretty good job with that. It just needs, it looks like that's the color black. It is the color black. But to be honest, I would rather add graphite to the smoke box, graphite to the bottom of the firebox, put the red roof on, and you can tell it's a Penske engine. If I wanted for it to be professionally painted, that would be interesting. I'd probably let my buddy Trainman 440 do it. But for now, it's on the projects list. It's just here. And it's a shame that I haven't really shown it yet. It would be really fun to run it and to show people that it smokes under the firebox from the motor. But yeah, those are my engines. I didn't show my other Q2 up close because it's basically the same engine, which is just a different number. It's interesting because when I was running test running these engines yesterday, 6187 seems to not respond that much to dirty spots or maybe some small dead zones. And I talked with a couple of people and they're like, there might be a keep live. And I'm like, I don't know. I never opened it. I'll probably open it later at a later date. Maybe when the decoder starts to go bad and I want to switch to TCS WOW for these engines and I have the guts to put them in there. I don't think it's that hard. I just got to figure out what each wire represents in their plug-in and just go into the tender, splice some wires and just splice it back to a TCS WOW decoder. And some people are like, well, what about the smoke function? I don't really care about the smoke. And to be honest, 6195 is getting a little bit of like residue on her cab, and to be honest, I don't really want that. I don't really want that. I'm like, why? And it's funny because there was no plastic wraps around these when I got this, and when I got 6195, which is strange. And I'm like, why is there residue on the top? So I could tell there was still smoke in that engine. So I was like, okay. So I took one of the plastic wrap tender, but not plastic wrap tender, but the plastic wrap from 6187's tender, and I just wrapped it around 6195. So the oil residue that I guess is against the foam inside the 6195's box doesn't get all over the top of the locomotive again. Which, to be honest, that's something that actually worked for once. So that's that for 6195. But yeah, Broadway Limited doesn't make these anymore. So that comes to the main topic right now. And I'll get to that on the next part of the clip. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about Broadway's lack of PRR brass hybrids now. There's only the S2 now. There's no other PRR brass hybrid engine. PRR used to have the most brass hybrid engines, I believe, with the S2 and originally the Q2. The Q2 was the first, and then the S2. And yeah, PRR had the S2 and the Q2 until the Q2 just no longer owned by Broadway Limited. So it's just the S2 now, and we're probably wondering what's the next step for Broadway to do. And I have these two brass engines to maybe have an idea what might be coming next. The N1 is probably the least likely to be a brass engine and more likely to be either a die-cast hybrid or a plastic-bodied model if Broadway decides to make an N1. It would be cool. I already have an N1, and this N1 is most likely going to be the model that's going to have the least issues once worked on and finalized to be a non-shorting locomotive. It obviously is going to have TCS WOW. I'm going TCS WOW crazy over my steam and diesel because, oh my gosh, the sounds are really nice. I like the ease of use of the interface, but that's not the reason why we're not going to talk about TCS. I just like TCS because simply the sounds. But for the brass engines that are most likely that I think would be a good candidate to replace the Q2 is the Q1. And some people are probably rolling their eyes like it was a failure. Well, so was the S2. Now, the S2 was more popular because of Lionel with their post-war model of the S2. But I think the Q1 is also very unique in its own way, too. And I think that would be a unique challenge for Broadway to make. The Q2 was a really weird engine in itself. But with the drive wheels, obviously. But the Q1 has a different way of having the drive wheels set up. And to be honest, if Pennsylvania had the time to work on the Q1, I'm pretty sure with the current configuration that they had it, with the reverse drivers, they could fix it. Some people will probably like, no, that's bullshit. There's no way they could fix it. It was a terrible, flawed design. Well, here's the thing, right? You got to try things. And engineering has a lot of failures. Yes, they tried it before with the B&O's 4444, and it was a failure. The Q1's potential I could see could be solved in numerous ways. The Q1 could have been an oil burner, but Pennsylvania didn't really do oil burners that much, if not any at all. They could do heat shields around the rear drivers, or they could possibly delete the booster engine from the rear, in the rear trailing truck. They have a booster engine in the Q2 and the Q1. They probably could have put the booster engine maybe in the Pilot instead. Now, I don't know any engine had boosters, engine boosters, and steam generator boosters in the Pilot, but it could have been another way so that it's local to the front with the exhaust. And I think that could have also gave space for a bigger firebox too, to go down behind the front of those drivers in the rear with the pistons, so that you can have a bigger firebox. For the pistons maintenance, the heat shield is basically just a metal sheet like shield that basically it's just a sheet of metal that curves over and behind it to block, basically heat from getting close to the rear cylinder cases. So that would probably help with lower maintenance. What about steam pressure reaching all the way to the back? Well, that could be solved with turbochargers. You might be wondering, well, turbochargers were put in cars and diesels. That is true. However, you could probably boost the rear's power to counterbalance the front's wheel slippage so that it had more power in the rear. But I could be talking shit, but I'm just saying as a hypothetical way. There's probably solutions to help this engine work out its kinks, even with a unique design. And to be honest, I have to say the Q1's my favorite failure locomotive. I just like the uniqueness of it. It was such a weird locomotive. It has a streamlined tender similar to the T1 and the S2. It has a doghouse on it. This was which is to some people is really stupid, but who cares? The doghouse does look rather streamlined, if you ask me. It's just a very unique engine that was supposed to be a dual service locomotive, which is interesting. A lot of engines were rather dual service at the time. And I think it would be a unique engine for Broadway to make as a brass hybrid engine. It's right around the same size as the Q2. Regardless of the driver's, diameter, I believe they can get it down to similar curve radius as the Q2. Right around 24 to 26 inch radius. So, you might think, well, the rear cylinders could be a problem. They could, but you can solve that. There's ways to solve that. And I mean, if Broadway's looking for another, engine to do, brass hybrid, you could do the Q1. It's a very unique locomotive. It's not that very, it's not the most popular engine out there, obviously, for its weird reasons, and it has, some people call it ugly, and to some people, I can understand why they think it's ugly. I just like the cab design compared to what they went with for the Q2 and the J1s. I really like that streamlined look of the cab where where the windows angle forward like this, and they angle out like that. That's a really cool looking design, and I'm surprised that the Q2 didn't have that design. I thought it would be really cool. The bullet nose I really like too. I'd love to have the bullet nose on my Q2s. It's such a nice looking look, and to my opinion, I think it's one of the coolest looking engines out there. It's so unique looking and strange, but that's why it's called a Q series. They call it the queer series or the odd series. And it's a really unique locomotive. And some people are like, well, why make this? There was only one engine made. And I'm like, well, here's the thing. They can do both the bullet nose and the de-streamlined version if they wanted to. So they can make two versions of this engine. And a lot of people are going to probably go for the bullet nose. But some people are also going to go for the unstreamlined version so they can pair it up with Q2s and other Penske engines. Because basically it had the Q2's front end when it got de-streamlined. It's just one of those really unique engines that I really like. And just like the S2, it was a one-off engine. And not a lot of people complained about that when they made the S2. Yeah, there were like three versions. They had the little baby, shitty, paper-looking elephant ears. And then you had the huge elephant ears that everyone likes. And then you had it without the elephant ears, which is strange. That's the rarest one I seem to not see is the version without the elephant ears. And to be honest, I'd rather have either the elephant ear or without the elephant ears if I can get an S2. And to be honest with you, I wasn't really keen on getting an S2. But now that I look at it and I've seen it and I think it's pretty cool, I might get one at some point if the price is right. Same with the Q2s. Some people try to go for like over $900 for these Q2s. I'm like, you guys are insane. They're not worth that much. There were 1,600 of these made. And guess what? I see at least one Q2 posted on eBay since like, I don't know, 4 months ago. Yeah, at least one Q2. I've seen at most two Q2s, Broadway Limited Q2s at once on eBay. You could probably find them at train shows, maybe for even cheaper. Maybe. Because people are starting to understand their true value. They're around $800, which is fine. It's right around the price of the modern brass hybrid engines, which, to be honest with you, isn't that bad. The new Challenger is around $800, $760, $800, pretty much the same price as the Q2 is in valued now. The new early Challengers, I think, bigger than this engine, not maybe overall length because of the tender included, but as a big engine with high amounts of detail, it is a nice engine. Compare that with, Ather and Genesis, for example. That's cheaper, the Ather and Genesis one. But people will go for Broadway because, people like Broadway. And for reasons, I know people don't like Broadway sometimes. And to be honest with you, it's a love-hate relationship. And I've said it on my review with the Q2s. These are Broadway's, in my opinion, best engine. In my opinion. I find them to have barely any flaws, even at all after 10 years of existing. They are very nice models. And I really want them to make more Pensy models. Now, recently, if anybody's been keeping up with Broadway's news and announcements, they just announced the Pennsylvania Railroad E6 for who knows if it's a plastic body model or if it's a die-cast hybrid model. I don't know. Nobody knows. They got a pre-production example at Broadway. They showcased it in one of their live streams. And I want one. Problem is, what is the price to get an E6? Because brass E6 go for around $200, maybe even less, depending on the quality or if somebody understands the value. And that's without DCC sound or whatever, and pain sometimes, yada, yada, yada. The brass ones I heard from Trainman 440 are relatively one of the beginner-friendly into brass models. Usually not the tiny engines, but usually something from like Gem or Sunset brass is usually more DCC friendly, easy to work on, and it's for beginners to work for brass. And for me to have a Q1 is like you're getting into like the deep below of the iceberg kind of working with brass models. So with Broadway making the E6, which is great, they're adding more new Pennsylvania models. They've had a lot of probably the latest Pennsylvania model that was like the newest type that they made was probably the L1. And the Baldwin, the L1, not the Baldwin Sharks. The Baldwin Sharks was like New York and Pennsylvania and B&O and D&H. But the E6 is a welcome addition. I like to see a G5 at some point. And if they were going to do more, normal Pensy engines, and they have done a 210-2 before, they should do an N1 or an N2 SA. N1 SA or an N2 SA. I'd like to see an N1 SA personally. As a die-cast hybrid I would like to see it rather as a die-cast hybrid more than a plastic hybrid. But if they do plastic, it doesn't matter. As long as the drivetrain is very solid, I'm happy with it. I don't really care. But what about Pensy big engines? Like the Q1 or the S1. Now the S1 is an interesting topic, which is strangely enough the title card of this video, or thumbnail. The thumbnail of this video is going to be an S1. Will Broadway Limited ever make an S1? The famous or infamous in this matter, the big engine. A lot of people would probably want an S1, and when Lionel announced their rerun of their Legacy S1, it was like $1,400, which, to be honest, I was surprised. I'm surprised that thing's not $2,000. Granted, it's not as highly detailed as probably a brass hybrid made by Lionel or something like that, which got finer details, and the top of it is brass, which got more accurate proportions and all that stuff like that. So, well, and they also came out with multiple color versions, including two fantasy versions. So what they had for Lionel is that they made the Pennsylvania version. It was just Brunswick green with Pennsylvania on the side. Then they have the USA Railroads, or where I forgot what it's called, American Railroads, when it was at the World's Fair in the 1930s. And then they had two fantasy versions where they had the one with the flying, flying keystone on the front, and the second, I forgot what else was different. It's still Brunswick green, but the second one that they made that was a fantasy was the Tuscan Red Fleet of Modernism version, and I to be honest with you, I loved the color that they had in the catalog. The real one is FOM is a little bit too bright of a red, of a Tuscan red. If it was darker, the Tuscan red, to what the coaches really look like, I would have bought it and put it in a case and put it in a glass case, because it's so beautiful. If you want, just look up Eric's Trains and look up his S1. It is a beautiful engine. Yes, the Tuscan red for the F1 is too bright, but if you think about it, what it would look like with the correct Tuscan red, it would actually be a very beautiful and striking engine. I'm surprised Pennsylvania did not even try that. That's just my opinion. I think that would have been considered one of the most beautiful looking engines in America at the time. The horn is made out of brass. It's colored brass. The bell, basically the brass streamline, the gold leaf stripes and all that stuff. Some of the streamlining stripes on there it's beautiful. It's such a beautiful engine with that fantasy scheme. I'm like, man, it looks so much more colorful and beautiful than the simple DGLE. It's just, oh my gosh. And I know that Broadway Limited was pretty much copying in a way of Lionel's fantasy schemes with the Milwaukee S3, with the Heritage, Hiawatha scheme and all that stuff, even with the black version. I know they don't really do fantasy schemes for brass hybrid engines, but if they decide to make an S1 for some reason, I don't know how they're going to make it go on 24-inch curves. I would think 24 inches is the minimum, and like the more comfortable is 26-inch radius. But if they were going to do it, they basically have to copy Lionel, because I'd love to get my hands on an HO scale Tuscan Red S1 that can handle a minimum of 24 to 26 inch radius curves. I would buy it in a heartbeat, regardless if it's like $800, $900. I'm serious. That's just me. I love to have an S1, even though some people find it to be ugly. I mean, look, Raymond Loewy designed a T1. T1's my favorite steam engine of all the steam engines. To me, that's a beautiful engine in my opinion. But yeah, it's would Broadway make it? And to be honest, there is a good chance. However, I don't know if it's very likely at all. There's a slim chance they'll make it. There is probably people talking about it, and maybe picking at Broadway to say, hey, can you make S1? Can you make an S1? Broadway's probably like, I don't know, because here's the thing. Brass hybrid is to go after those, not so well-known, sometimes well-known engines, and they make them. Like the Q2. The Q2 I think is actually one of the most obscure engines that they actually made a brass hybrid engine on. And probably the Great Northern and SPS 484s. I don't know anything about those engines. They did the J3. They did the J3A Dreyfus Hudson, which I do have. I don't have it out here because we're talking about Pennsylvania here. We're not talking about New York Central. Sorry, New York Central. But I do have that, and that's an actually well-known engine. I'm surprised they did a brass hybrid of that, not like a regular die-cast or plastic hybrid. But nevertheless, it's a beautiful engine, and I love it, and it runs really well. It's probably the best running brass hybrid engine I have, even though I really only have 2 types of brass engines. They also made that L series CNO streamlined engine, which is strange that they made that. They don't have like the non-streamlined version. I would think that would be a brass engine as well, because the amount of detail on the unstreamlined L series Hudsons is impeccable. It is amazing. A lot of people want to see a lot more CNO stuff and a lot more, and I agree. I mean, Pennsylvania had 2 brass engines. New York Central had 2 brass engines too. If anybody knows about the L4 or the L4, I think it's an L4. Yeah, it's an L4 Mohawk. It had skull and disc drivers. I don't know if they had any other disc drivers, but I know it had skull and disc drivers, and it's a wonderful model as well. If you check out Treyman 440's channel, he has one as well, and he loves that engine too. It's a really nice engine. I wouldn't get it because I don't really model New York Central. I just got the Dreyfus Hudson because I like the Dreyfus Hudson. Enough said. But yeah, I'd love to see more, Pennsylvania models. And, some people seem to look at Broadway and it's like, Broadway, stop making Penske. We're tired of Penske. We're tired of Penske and all these USRA and big boys and UP stuff. And the thing is you got to remember, if you know your Broadway Limited history, they basically took over PCM. PCM made a lot of Penske models. They made the M1. They made the K4. I think, yeah. They made the K4. No. They made the M1. They made the J1. They made the T1. And they made a couple other Pennsylvania models. And I think also the K4, but don't take my word on it. I know. Well, you got to know your history. You're right. I got to know my history. They made Norfolk and Western engines. They made the J class. They made the A class, and they made the Y6. They did those, and then they did the big boy as well. I don't know if they had the Challenger, but yeah, Penske, New York Central sorta. Penske, UP, and Norfolk and Western were pretty much the big 3 originally. And then they branched out to USRA, and then they did USRA is basically the 282 Mikado. They did more Penske. They do a lot of Penske, these guys. I can tell you, Broadway Limited Imports, given it in the name, Broadway Limited, with the Keystone on their logo, is mainly a Penske-focused kind of railroad company. They just did another run of the... they did a 5th run of or 4th or 5th, generation of the I-1 SA decapods? Like, holy cow. I would be surprised if the T1 comes again for a 4th time. The T1... I'd love to see the L1 return. L1 is a nice model. I have one. I love it. If you haven't seen it, They're doing Baldwin Centipedes again, which I can confirm to you now. I'm getting the new set. I'm getting a new set of the single stripe because everyone's trying to sell the single stripe on eBay and all the other ones for like over the value that I'm getting it for when I talk with someone who will get me one for a reasonable price. And they also did the Baldwin Sharks, which I'd love to see them come out with again. I want the single stripe ones at a reasonable price. I want the single stripe ones, and I want the Tuscan Red Baldwin Sharks. And going back to brass hybrids again. They never done a brass hybrid diesel, which usually you don't really need to do with diesel, right? I mean, you technically don't really have to, but it would be interesting. And I was thinking about the BP20. Now, people are wondering, what is the BP20? The BP20 is pretty much the Baldwin RF16 version, the shark nose, that has a 6-axle. That's a 6-axle version. That kind of like the E series. And they are big diesels. They are bigger than the E series engine, which I'm actually pretty shocked that they are bigger than the E's. They're bigger than the PAs. And they're bigger than the Erie builds. Like they are big 6-axle diesels, and I'd love if they don't do a plastic body version of one, do a brass one. They were not successes. They were not super successful diesels, but I don't care. I love Baldwin diesels. They're probably the most. They are the most diesels that I have in my fleet right now. I like Baldwin. They have very unique stuff, and a lot of them were shit. But when it came to RF16, that is my favorite diesel of all time. It's the RF16. Some people love the design, some people hate it. RF16 is my favorite diesel, and the BP20 equally. They are very cool diesels, and I hope Broadway does something with those, whether it be a brass hybrid or a regular plastic model. They only made them for Pennsy, though. That's the only problem. Now, they made them in 3 versions. They have done a single stripe. I know it. That was in DGLE. They have done a single stripe, I think Tuscan Red. Don't quote me on it, but I think they did. They did a 5-stripe of both versions. I know that. So, I think that's a good enough amount, especially with the GG1 usually being mainly Pennsy, right? But there hasn't been too many of them. There's only really like 4 ways you can do these. It's both Tuscan Red, single stripe or 5-stripe, or Tuscan, or not Tuscan Green, DGLE or Brunswick Green, 5-stripe or single stripe. Would I buy an AB set? Yes. I would buy a couple, actually. I would buy a Tuscan Red, obviously, and I'd buy a single stripe AB set of the DGLE. The 5-stripe I would get in Tuscan Red if they made them, and I would love for them to make them, and I hope they have them as a plan, because Broadway seems to be a Pennsy-like company. They've done a lot of Pennsy models, and if they were going to do another Pennsy brass hybrid, it would be a BP20 if they don't want to do it in regular, a regular plastic body, die-cast chassis locomotive, or, one of those things. They could do a Q1, an S1, or they could do something obscure, like a CC1, done by Lionel's, a Vision Line engine, which is a 0880. They could do a HC1, which is a 2880. Or is it the 2? It's really weird. It has a huge bell pair firebox. It is huge. It has like a support beam on the top of the firebox that connects to the cab, I guess, to keep it from collapsing or something. I don't know. It's a weird locomotive, and I have to say that would be a really cool brass hybrid engine in terms of Pennsy. I'm going to go a bit out of Pennsy for a second in terms of the next brass hybrid. And it's so weird that, talking about Lionel, they made the 210-10-2 from ATSF, but not the 210-10-2 or Virginian AE, which was actually the only successful 210-10-2 in the world, the class. Also nicknamed the Viginettes. I would like to see that as a brass hybrid model for the Virginian. I know a lot of people want Broadway to do an Allegheny. Look, guys, you got River Ross who makes them, and you're probably going to have Scale Trains that's going to make the Allegheny or the Blue Ridge. Because, well, MTH used to make them, and guess who has all the MTH's HO tooling? Scale Trains. When is it going to happen? I do not know. Right now, Scale Train seems to be like gun-ho happy with modern stuff, which I understand. A lot of people like modern stuff. It's fine. I don't have a problem with it. However, I want to see some steam. Scale Train steam. But yeah, a brass hybrid Viginette from Broadway would be really unique, and I think would add more, railroad diversity to their lineup. I'm pretty sure it would be a pretty popular model. Some people would probably like, why would I want that? Well, it's a 2-10-10-2, and it was the only successful class in the world. As far as we all know so far in history, knowing history. And they were powerhouses. They were meant to haul coal drags up and down the Blue Ridge all day. They are powerful monsters. They have the widest boiler diameter of any American steam engine. They are massive. And to be honest, I might want one because they are so cool. I think they're really cool engines. They're so massive and weird that is amazing. They came without cabs, by the way, when they delivered them to the Virginian. It was, oh my gosh, they had to make their own cabs because they thought they would be too big to build the cabs on them. They could have been camelbacks, but they weren't. But yeah, brass hybrids. Maybe here's something I didn't talk about. How about the FF1, right? The FF1. Or the Big Liz, the locomotive the electric locomotive that was known to yank the couplers off of freight cars because it was too powerful. Oh my god, that thing's torque was amazing. That's another brass hybrid engine they could do, or die-cast body. I mean, Broadway has a lot of ideas to do with brass engines when it comes to the Pennsylvania Railroad. Preferably, I'd like to see a Q1. Not because I want to sell off my Q1 or anything. No. I want to see more from Broadway since we lost the Q2 as a returning engine in the future. It's just not going to happen for a very long time. Who knows? It could be decades, unfortunately. So right now, we only have the S2, and currently I think there's only 2 runs. There was the Paragon 2, I believe. I could be wrong. I don't know for certain, but I think there were 1 or 2 runs of the S2 only in Paragon 3, maybe in Paragon 2. I've never seen a Paragon 2 S2. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know how many of those have been made, but I'd love to see an S2 return. Or they do something new for Pensy for brass hybrid. I think they can pull off the Q1 flawlessly. Before I end off this video, we're gonna look at the bottom of the Q1. Right? Here's the Q1. And here's the Q2. Look, they're right next to each other, right? There's very little difference. Yes, the wheel diameters on the Q1's bigger, but I think if we put them next to each other, the Q1's actually longer in terms of, the Q1's longer. No, not the Q1. I'm sorry, the Q2 is longer. It's bigger. The Q2 is actually bigger, guys. I think the Q1 could do better with a smaller pilot. And maybe, yeah, a smaller pilot. Maybe the wheels pushed up a little bit more in terms of axle distance between each other on the front pilot. And, I think this could happen. I think there's a way that Broadway can probably make this work. And I'm seeing possible solutions that can be done. I just can't formulate them in the words at the moment. But yeah, if we look at these wheels side by side, they're pretty much, the distance between, from the extremities of the wheel and the last axle of the drivers right here to the front axle of the driver sets, they're pretty much the same. They're pretty much, the same in terms of extremities and whatnot. And I think the drivers are not the huge issue. Maybe they need different bearings to possibly turn the Q1 better. Who knows? I think if Broadway wants to do another brass hybrid, I think a Q1 is a pretty good candidate to replace the Q2 in terms of brass hybrids. Granted, the Q1 is a one-off model. However, there were two variations of it, and they're different enough variations that basically tell you it's justified to have two variations. So when I look at the Challenger, the new Challenger that they made, there are small differences. Like, in my opinion, especially the UP 9000 series. All right, that makes no sense. I don't understand why they have two. Oh, there's a different cat. It's barely different. The Q1, there's something different. There's more skirting. There's the bullet nose. There's a little bit different front cab. That the main difference is the bullet nose. That I think is a good enough difference, is the bullet nose and some more skirting on the side, or no skirting. That I think is a good way to express different variations of a brass hybrid model. Other than there's a slight difference. Because the Q2 is the same thing. 6131 was a prototype, right? It had quick skirts that extended downwards at the front driving cylinders that covered a bit more of the detail. And it was just it's not that much of a huge difference, and that was it. I'm like, are you serious? That's the only other reason you have a variation. Do something like the Q1 where there was like two major differences between the streamlined and the de-skirted streamlined one. Do that one, and I think that would be a very good model to do. You can make two variations, and that would be fine. And when it comes to brass hybrids, there's not a lot of variations of the same model of the same class you're trying to make. And yes, and to compare with the S2, they should have only made like two variations, although there were actually three. They did have the small, tiny-eared smoke deflectors, which looks stupid. And then you got without the smoke deflectors and with the smoke deflectors. The smoke deflectors and the full smoke deflectors and without the smoke deflectors are two good variations, in my opinion. The Q1, yeah, you could do two variations of that, and that is also a one-off model. So if I were, and the S1 too, however, they didn't get rid of the cone nose on the end of it. They just de-skirted it. So you can see more detail, I guess. There you go. So if I were to say, what is the next Pennsylvania Railroad brass hybrid? I'm going to conclude that it's either going to be a Q1 or an S1. I would like to have a Q1 brass hybrid. I would like to have a Q1 brass hybrid. And I would actually like also the S1 brass hybrid as well, equally. So that's a tough tough choice. So yeah, I know this segment's the longest segment, but there you go. This is going to conclude this week's. Not really this week's. Who knows when I'm going to do another Train Talks episode? But for now, this is my experimental series. It always has been. Originally, I was going to do 2 hours. Then it was like a short unboxing. And now it's talk about what could be done next, or what Pensy and stuff with brass and brass hybrids and yada yada yada. So yeah, future. My opinion, it looks all right, especially with Broadway and future Pensy models. Brass hybrid Pensy. I really hope they do another brass hybrid Pensy besides the S2. Something different, and I'll be excited to see what they're gonna do next. I don't think it's gonna be N1, but I mean you could do N1 with plastic or diecast. Come on, we're talking about like something unique. So yeah, all right, that ends this week's. Here we go again with the weeks. Forget it. I'll see you guys later from the Pennsylvania, Florida Eastern. Bye now.